It's my great pleasure to introduce Chris Edwards as our first Easton speaker. In a way, Chris is a true LA product. He's combining the creativity of entertainment with technology. So he began his career in digital cinematography at Disney before working for George Lucas at Skywalker Ranch. There he worked on pre-visualizing the Star Wars Episode III movie. And as the Star Wars project was winding down, Chris asked his team of talented artists whether they'd be interested in creating a new company with him called The Third Floor. Why was it called The Third Floor? Because they were all working on the third floor of George Lucas's ranch. So Chris is the CEO of that company, and today The Third Floor is the world's leading pre-visualization studio, which services about 40 major feature films each year. Raise your hands if you've seen those films. So Avengers, Thor, X-Men, Godzilla, Gravity, you name them. All right, so in parallel, Chris has been interested in virtual reality, which is in a way the next big thing, and has founded another company simply called the Virtual Reality Company. The goal is to create content for the VR headsets that will be out for Christmas. And there is already a lot of buzz about his company, and we are delighted that he agreed to kindly share his vision about the future of the entertainment industry and how technology can shape the entertainment industry. So without any further ado, let's welcome Chris Edwards.
What an honor to be here tonight. Thank you for staying so late. And I wanted to see if any of you guys have heard of what pre-visualization is before. Had you heard that term before? Okay, so not too many. So this is going to be a good audience because I want to take you on a retrospective of my life in media, which began with this company called The Third Floor. But really, it's been a long journey of creating not only one company, but multiple companies to help evolve to meet the changing demands of the marketplace. So I kind of call myself a Hollywood survivor because I don't know if you guys noticed, but in the entertainment industry in 2011, 2012, there was a bit of a dip of the amount of work that was being produced in Hollywood. Big global financial trends and a lot of uncertainty that has changed the landscape of at least a Los Angeles version of Hollywood. And so I want to weave in my own personal story and sort of how we kept those companies going and innovating through our journey as we look back at what technology was previous to our involvement. And then I'm going to bring you up to speed on what we're doing today and then talk a little bit about the future. So the first company was The Third Floor Pre-Visualization Studio, which has been around for over a decade. And then I decided to create a company called Hydra to actually develop more IP and other properties to develop that in parallel. And then today I'll talk a little bit more about the virtual reality company, which is a relatively new company. So it's important as all of you business leaders and managers go out into the workplace to think about what's going on in your industry right now and look forward to what's about to happen and be ready to change and adapt your businesses accordingly. So I want to take you back to my humble origins here at the Skywalker Ranch. And I don't know if it's possible to dim the lights a little bit, but that would be really cool so you guys could see this a little bit better. So we were actually up there on that third floor. George Lucas hung out on the right side, over there somewhere. And we worked literally directly with George Lucas to plan this film, which you can see snippets of this in, there you go, now you can see. You can see snippets of this in this preview over here. So this was the animated blueprint pre-visualization of the movie. We did this 3 times over for the entire movie, for every single shot. So literally 7,000 iterations of shots, all created by a team of 10 people up in the attic. There should be some sound with this too. And And what we wanted to do is keep that team alive past this one project and start our own company entrepreneurially. Of course, the only materials we had to work with at the time were little doodles from George and Steven, as you can see here. So that's a George Lucas original. This is a Steven Spielberg original with Chewbacca, obviously. And we even used the napkins to convey ideas. So our company has become the largest previs company in the world. We're very much an artist-centric company because we were a band of brothers and now a band of brothers and sisters. And we have an office, a big office in Los Angeles down on the other end of Wilshire, and set up shop in London, as well as small satellite companies in Canada and Australia. But we tend to work all around the world. Here's some of the movies that we've worked on over the years, including some television, like if you're fans of Game of Thrones, we do design for a lot of the big dragon shots and set extensions and stuff that are in that too. So we contribute to over $2 billion of the US box office alone every year, and that's exponentially more if you consider the foreign box office. So here's a little reel that shows some of that activity over the last couple of years. So you can see the extent to which we take this. You should be able to watch a previous sequence and really feel like you're watching a version of the movie, get inspired by it, maybe feel some emotion, and it's only going to get better from there. See, oftentimes studios use this for testing certain scenes and, of course, validating a lot of their assumptions about what they want to do before they go out and shoot. Our company is totally based on the artists that are working at our studio, and I think that the dedication to the individual artists has really, really helped us grow, because there's very little attrition at our company since we have really good work ethic. We have people go home. I'd rather people go home and get refreshed and come back and bring their creativity the next day instead of working them to death. So because of that dedication, because of the mentorship with all the amazing clients that we have the pleasure of working with, they are becoming like sort of the future directors. And we're honored to be working with all these people every day. And to each of them, I say, and to all of you, that it's a really exciting time to be a content creator in the world. And it's exciting because three things. One, the process of making movies is changing. It has been for the last 10 years. So on movies like Avatar, where you have new forms of virtual camera work using literally human performances mapped onto CG characters. And then the opposite of that, where you have a real human performance, but then you replace everything around the human performance. In a way, this kind of resembles like the manual version of virtual reality, right? It's an actress that is getting her cues from all of these TV screens that are boxing her in all around her. And that light is being used as the practical lighting for her face. So there's all these experiments that we were doing to try to do innovative things on the feature side that were kind of bringing us closer and closer to experimenting with virtual reality. So back to the process itself, there's a lot of people with different theories about what's actually happening in the creative process, because in order to create a movie like this, there are so many layers, and it all is surrounding that inner story, the core of the story you're trying to tell. So this is from my good friend Alex McDowell, who has been trying to prophesize about how we are working now in iterative fashion, so around and around in circles as a collective team with all of our different disciplines in order to make one project better and better using all those disciplines. And I think that the process is becoming more and more like this, which is the culmination of many different technologies leading to what we call virtual production, which we'll get into later. The second thing that's changing is the actual distribution model for how you consume content and for how that content is distributed to consumers. So as you know, you can get on demand all kinds of media from Netflix and Hulu and various other sources. And let's not underestimate the power of the gaming networks that also have the ability to broadcast all kinds of apps and different streaming video. So these are predominantly becoming the way in which consumers adopt media. And when you combine that with what's happening or about to happen with the emergence of virtual reality devices, then you can see that not only the distribution has changed, but actually there's a new medium in town, a medium that's being added on to the rectangles that we've been looking at on walls in theaters and on home screens and on your iPad. This is a completely immersive medium that I think will be using all of those same distribution models. So more on that later, but we really believe that consumers, human beings are ready to adopt this new technology very, very quickly. And if you look at the history of how fast different technologies have been integrated into society, looking at the US, it took 13 years for 30% of the US population to have a television. And then later on with smartphones, you can see the curve there. The earliest smartphones were not your iPhone, but it was still adopted faster than your television market. But when you had the iPhones come out, then you see that large increase in the green right there. Tablets is very similar to the rate of adoption as smartphones. So I think we're going to see something along those lines in terms of the proliferation of devices in people's homes. So, but before I go too far forward, I really feel like we need to take a look at where all this stuff came from. So let's look at the earliest days of visualization before there was any modern technology and computers. Well, we as human beings have wanted to create paintings and various stories that we've been telling through our artwork since the days of the caveman. And over the years, we've adapted the way in which we do these things, making them more and more sophisticated to tell more and more interesting stories and to express the emotions that we want to express. And over time, we started formalizing that into different constructs, like a theater, which was the very first framing of a shot, if you will, because there's a proscenium and there's a bunch of action on that stage. And that, of course, is the predecessor to the modern actual film theater. But through all of these different types of medium, there is one common thread, that story is king. And in order to create great stories, very carefully done, because you wanted to make it as scary as possible, but without crossing any lines with the censorship of the time. So if you remember, there were certain scenes here that had to be very specifically designed in order to evoke that emotion. And when you looked at the way in which they combined shots together, like there was a dissolve from this shower drain all the way to a spinning shot with the same motion to the eye for the ending of the sequence. This is something that had to be planned in advance, because at the time they didn't have computers. They had to photochemically dissolve these together. So they used storyboards to plan that out. They also used amazing artists from not only storyboarding, but from the art department, production designers, art directors that would then take those storyboards and begin to flesh them out as more detailed paintings to capture the mood, the lighting of the scene, and begin to production design all the bits and pieces that had to come together to make that a real set.
Rebels, we better report to the base.
Once cameras got smaller, like this, what we call lipstick camera here. This is like visual effects supervisors playing with toys, quite literally
Pull next to that guy.
The previous Star Wars movie. They used that as a way to practically plan their shots. You can think of this as the predecessor to pre-visualization, the live manual version. I actually like the way that this sequence is cut together better than the final movie, especially at the end. So they just made one little diorama and they put everyone on sticks and wires and they just went through and used that over and over again. And it's amazing what you can do with pretty practical means. And that was only made possible because of that new camera system. Now it looks like we're going to take a big step backwards in resolution, but this was actually a big leap forward for the world of pre-visualization, because this is the first time in the history of the world that they used a computer to design a shot. And the reason why this was so important is because the computer does not lie about the field of view, the actual dimensions of the camera, and what lens you're using. So you can't cheat it like you can a drawing. And so the director was not only able to see in perspective what it was that they were actually going to be shooting on the day at this carnival scene, but they could also iteratively change just one element over and over again. So they could say, okay, I love this shot, but let's bring the flying actors down a little bit. So that's sort of the predecessor to what we do today, but this sort of looks like your Tron graphics.
To see
over the years, it got more sophisticated, where they added more detailed.
Here we can see the dramatic
shading,
similarities
and
between the electronic storyboards and the actual film.
So
Over
they
30
planned
minutes of
just
animation
sections
was
of movies
generated
like
for Three
little car
Rivers.
chases. This one
From this
done
experience,
at
we proved
my
the
colleagues
value
over
of the
at
end
Sony
product as a
Pictures
communication
Imageworks
tool
back
for
in
the
the day, very early on in 1993. Moving on to another old friend. So this is George Lucas's first new Star Wars movie, Episode 1. And at the time, he was the first one to do pre-visualization of the entire movie in one form or another. It wasn't all done with computer graphics. Some of it was done with puppets and found footage and whatnot, but at some point he had a whole version of the whole movie that he could take a step back and look and make sure that that's what he wanted to produce before it went to the much more expensive, higher quality version of it. So you get the idea. And these days, pre-visualization has become this interesting hub of all this activity. So you have the director, the production designer, the DP, and all of the creative collaborators feeding off of this blueprint. You know, it's like if you design a building, you know, for many, many generations, people have been designing buildings, and they demand to see the blueprints, and you want to be able to go in and sort of visualize that even in some piece of concept artwork. These days you can actually go in and through virtual reality see what it is that that lobby looks like, and you might want to choose the color of the furniture. And then once that vision is greenlit, then there's a technical analysis that happens that then leads to a calculation about how much steel, when should the steel arrive, does that arrive before or after the furniture? You know, all these logistics that didn't exist in such a cohesive way in Hollywood before pre-visualization became that sort of unifying force of multiple departments. So that's our niche, that's what we started to fill. We actually save money. A little bit of money in development and pre-production saves a ton of money during the shooting of the movie, which is the most expensive part. That's when everyone is on point, the actors are there, you're renting all this equipment. And then post-production is a very long process and maybe not as expensive per day, but can be costly in the end. So optimizing any choices, missteps there, it's better to do that in advance. The process of previs has become this really big important thing in our industry, and I'm using it kind of as a model for the way in which I conduct business in my other companies that I was about to get into. And I think the idea of planning things in advance and then executing with greater efficiency is something quite universal. I'm a big fan of being very specific about what your company does well and be really good at it. There's a lot of companies that try to be soup to nuts everything, and they're quickly overshadowed in the commoditization of the marketplace. So, it's easy to pick apart that one little piece of service and then outsource it to another company that's really good at that. But if we can be the best in the world at what we do, then there's usually a reason to work with us, and probably a reason to work with us in a convenient place for Hollywood studios like LA. So when I was looking at the options for expansion in the future, there were certain other disciplines, like what we'll get into in a minute, about Hydra. See, what happened was we ended up having that sort of deficit of work at one point. And most people would probably say, well, let's hold on to our profits and bunker down a little bit and wait for that storm to pass. But I saw my company, my lifeblood for the company is the human beings that work there. And I didn't want them to go away. I didn't want them to feel the real burn of what was happening in the harsh outside world. So I made the choice to reinvest in our company, and I did that in the form of company number 2. Is I was like, if I'm gonna keep people working on projects that we just make up for the future films that we hope to sell in the future, I'm gonna hopefully have a good return on my investment in the future. And that bet really paid off, because after the last couple of years, Hollywood has really picked up, and we had the largest existing team of over 200 people now that do this. And so that's why we do so much of the work. Development of stories in Hydra, as I'll show you, is a different beast than simply the visualization of stories. And that's really what I wanted to get at in my presentation about why we decided to pivot and do something else in that form, is because, you know what, we were building up sequences for other people's movies and making them stronger and better and usually quite successful, but we knew that it could be better, but we weren't allowed to, or we weren't involved early enough to change the DNA of the film. So that's why we created a separate think tank studio to be the focus on building the stories from scratch. But we use some of the philosophy of pre-visualization and iteration in order to create that. And then the virtual reality company is a whole nother story I'll get into in my finale here. Thank you. So we're not big on creating external proprietary technology, because everything that we create, in previs at least, has to go out and feed the rest of the ecosystem. But we do have proprietary processes that help us internally within the studio create things faster. We have a giant library of assets. It's like way back when, 10, 11 years ago, we created a rock and a landscape and a Jeep Wrangler. And I never have to create those things again. And that's what makes us more and more powerful. But it's not something that, to date, that I've actually monetized and turned into something that we can profit from beyond just the ability to use it to become a better studio. On the VR side, that is really where I think you're going to see a lot of patent pending legislation because everyone is trying to get their unique plug-in, their unique piece of technology. But we decided very early on not to run that arms race on the hardware side. I mean, it'd be foolish for me to go up against Google and Samsung and Sony and, Facebook. I think what we need to do, and this is what I've done in previs with all the major studios, is be the friend of everybody, right? And so that's what we're endeavoring to do in virtual reality. And I think personally, we won't be doing too much proprietary stuff other than the creations that we produce as a studio of content creation. I guess without the slides, I'll just explain a little bit about the origins of VRC. So what happened was, so we were already working on set, bringing computer graphics to the filmmakers, because before you used to create all this previs and it was just like a QuickTime movie that you check out and people would get excited about what the film could look like, and then they'd be like, okay, see you guys, I'm gonna go off and make this movie, and then maybe they'd bring those movies as reference. These days, what I was gonna get into is virtual production is the literal merging of those things. So we bring the previs quite literally out on set, and we play it back through the viewfinder of the cinematographer or the director's screen. So you see the live action actors, maybe some CG characters, and a full-on set extension of what the previs version of what it might look like in final post-production. Kind of a rougher version. But you can move the camera anywhere you wish, and it all stays in sync. This is called simulcam, and we were starting to use game engines, which is the engine of video games that actually run behind the scenes in all popular video games, and is the DNA of the virtual reality revolution. All of that stuff was being used by our team on set anyways, years before the Facebook acquisition and all of that. So what we ended up doing is seeing that this was going to become a new wave of this enthusiasm around VR, and I brought one of the filmmakers that I've been working with over the last couple of years down to see Oculus headquarters, where we got to see the secret tour that not a lot of people got to see. And they were very gracious to show us what they were working on, and at the time it was what's called 6 degrees of freedom virtual reality. So 3 degrees of freedom virtual reality is you're standing around and you look around, you're pan tilting around a 360 video. You can do it sitting. It's what you're seeing on Google Cardboard. Once you add another 3 degrees, not just XYZ rotation, but XYZ translation, right? You can actually move around the environment. It's a completely different experience, and it's the super killer app that is going to make VR so addictive. My own daughter is back there in the audience. Echo, she's awesome. She is my guinea pig for all of the virtual reality 6-degree experiences, and it's been awesome painting up a storm, building things, using hand controllers to drive vehicles, and all this stuff that we're experimenting with. When you can even just change your position just a little bit with your head, you actually believe that those objects are real and in your space. You feel more immersed. And so those 6 degrees of freedom experiences are what we're endeavoring to do, and that's what we saw at Oculus. So this filmmaker by the name of Robert Stromberg, who is the 2-time Academy Award winner for Alice in Wonderland, and before that Avatar, for the Art Direction Award, which was won back-to-back, which is a distinction that has never happened in that category ever for anyone. And because of that lineage of being this amazing designer, production designer of these big, elaborate world-building movies, he got a gig to do a first-time director of a movie called Maleficent. So Maleficent became like Disney's biggest box office success of that year, and therefore made him the highest grossing first-time director still in the history of the world. So, but Rob is a super humble guy, and all he really wanted to do was to find new innovative ways to build worlds and to tell stories within those worlds. He actually had so many ideas that he couldn't put onto film because the technology didn't exist. And he started telling us about these things through our Hydra collaboration, right? He wanted to build a script about this, a script about that. And then one of them in particular was very ambitious. And when we listened to that, I had just come back from GDC, the Game Developers Conference, to see some of these early virtual reality experiments. And I said, I think now is the time to do this project. I believe wholeheartedly that this thing is going to take off. And I'll tell you why. It's because the people that we put in our early virtual reality experiences, it doesn't matter whether they're my daughter all the way through I guess the most businessy business guy that might not be as excitable as the rest of us. They all turn into children at heart. Like you see, after a while, they start looking around and there's a little smile that grows. And that is magic. That's like lightning in a bottle that we need to capture. That's like back to the original wonder of Disney. moving on. So also, there's a whole new subspecialty. So tech-viz is the process of getting ready for the set. Post-viz is after you've shot footage, we immediately start working on the preemptive visual effects pass, because you have a director there that's trying their best to cobble their film together with their editor. And sometimes these days you have a whole bunch of green screen and funky shots, and it's very hard for even them to visualize what they're trying to do. So that's what we do here. Like, this is a Narnia 2 Prince Caspian. You can see those are the previs and the final shot. So we get very, very close, basically repurposing the imagery that was shot and zooming out, cutting things out that we don't need. We don't do every single shot. You can see those guys with wires. But to the studio, before this all existed, it looked like a shot of a sky and a bunch of people splashing around in the water. You know, that sequence, when shown without this imagery, was almost about to be cut out of the movie. And in this case, finally, we were allowed to do this, and it became not only in the movie, but it was something that was done. Yeah, that's okay. I like it dark. It's cool. Yeah. So, anyways, what happens is we become this conduit to not only, well, in the case of Star Wars, it was only one company because George owns the Industrial Light and Magic company, but in Avatar, there's like 15 different companies that work on this, so everyone feeds off of this vision. I'd rather fix it in pre than fix it in post. This applies to so many different areas of the industry, including commercials. You can see how we plan all these various different commercials here. It's very similar, but we just do this very quickly. This is video game cinematics. You may not be aware that we're kind of behind the scenes on a lot of video game cinematics, including things like Resident Evil, Need for Speed, Command and Conquer, even from the creator of Final Fantasy. We did some stuff for him. This is more like what we do today, where we're actually become the producers, outsourcers of not only through the previs,
Fallen God,
we also are
creator and destroyer of worlds. Hear my vow.
And segueing over to theme parks. So theme parks are a fun distraction from the other stuff that we do. We really love doing it because it's the engineering side of our brains working with the total creative side of things. Oftentimes, we're either designing the park itself, which is more of an architectural exercise. This was our very first project ever outside of Lucasfilm, the one that kept us alive in the early days when there were just 6 of us working in a boxcar-sized office. And the formats of these things are changing and becoming more and more immersive. Kind of sounds like an attempt at virtual reality, where you're going into a dome and you're being surrounded by the practical version of that. So we did something for the Marvel experience. We've been designing stuff around the world for Wanda and a whole bunch of other entrepreneurial companies. In order to do this, whether it be a feature film or a theme park or a commercial, we're using all kinds of new technologies to build worlds. And this is the library I was talking about, where you can go through. It's like Neo in the Matrix when they say, "Give me guns," and then they go, all the guns come out, and you get to choose from things. And maybe you want to change the color of that, or rip the handlebars off and repurpose it in another way. But these days, it's really hard not to find something in our ARC database, which is because we were working on a biblical movie at the time. We called it an ARC. So we have 2 of every asset in there, and then. Basically, okay, so once you've built the world, a world sitting around doing nothing is not really a story. So we bring that to life with a combination of hand-keyed animation, motion capture, and virtual camera work. If you go further than that, where you have not just motion capture, but the actors' performances with their faces captured, like what you see in Avatar and in films like let's see, Planet of the Apes movies, for example, you're more than likely going to see this guy, who, Andy Serkis, who's the award-winning, much applauded actor behind those parts, behind Gollum and Caesar. And so this is becoming a big thing, and oftentimes we're not doing it at this level, but we're interfacing with teams that do that. And they're very cool people. Also, virtual cameras can be used on set to literally see what's happening live. This is what we call our virtual rapid prototyping process. If you combine that with what's happening with the live camera, you get virtual production. Because early on, there was only production and visual effects came on as the enhancement of whatever you could capture practically. Previs became that enhancement to help both sides become more efficient. What we're seeing is everyone's kind of gravitating towards each other, and in the middle of that is virtual production. That's when we're all on set, all at the same time, trying to iterate together. And that is essentially the holodeck. It's the future of filmmaking. It's going to change the way in which sound stages look and feel and how we interface with each other. It used to look like this, which is a big mess. And, but it's becoming more and more streamlined, and now there's terminology behind that. There's new job descriptions. It's really a reinvention of the Hollywood content shooting process. So for example, with Simulcam, you rig up the camera with all kinds of different trackers so that what you see is the practical. You can see here, this is what is actually being shot on set, which doesn't look like much other than the green screen. But in here, this is that first version of the shot that James Cameron, I believe, was operating the shot at this first time, seeing his actors superimposed over top of the shot. And he can concentrate on the actor performance, yet get the perfect background plate. So it makes compositing and stuff very easy. So I'm going to skip ahead because there's a million different examples. But on the film Real Steel, you can see this little breakdown where what happens is you do the motion capture. Motion capture then gets put into the previs. We do our virtual camera for that, so we get a more invigorated camera. And then you overlay that on the set while they're really operating it during the actual shot. So what's exciting is that now there's so many tools and there's so much capability to create whatever you want. There's very few limitations. And so we asked ourselves, well, where do we go from there? Because we can only make the film so strong. As I was alluding to earlier, we decided let's create our own film development company because we should start a little earlier. And I got together with Rob and Dylan Cole, who's now the production designer of the next couple of Avatar movies, and of Maleficent with Rob. And basically we said, why can't we just modify the process of scripting and kind of merge it in with the philosophies of previs and a couple of other influences from Silicon Valley, sort of the way in which you do agile development and Scrum, if you guys know that. But let's go through and use the powers of great writing and the powers of great visualization together.
Hang on. Got him. Head down to Interstate 15, level 3. Suspect is headed to level 3. Hang on.
The idea is to not just build one story, but to build an entire world or a transmedia franchise, right? So don't think about it as just one movie, but as the backstory and what products are going to come after that. And a lot of times people do a very bad job of mismanaging their IP in this regard. If it's baked into the process early on, then you have a much greater chance at involving those who are the game developers, who are the book publishers, who are the toy manufacturers, and getting their advice in the core structuring of the story so that it actually becomes good products on those platforms without watering down the story itself. So along those lines of creating those transmedia worlds, we were always open to what are those things that you can produce. And as virtual reality started coming into the limelight again, after the Lawnmower Man days, we said, you know what, we're already doing this, we're creating video games, we know how to do stuff with the Unreal Engine and the CryEngine and Unity, the prevailing game engines. And you see now that there's a lot of these headsets being built, but not a lot of creators, at least from Hollywood's standpoint, creating these things. So what we ended up doing was we just like took our previous assets and started throwing them into the game engine, and all of a sudden you get all this free lighting and bounce light. It starts looking a little bit more cinematic. And if you look at what's happening in the games world, as you know, if any of you are like intense gamers or fans of gaming, it's getting closer and closer in real time to what you might see in a feature film. So it's truly, there's very little difference between that sort of final rendered imagery that might take a day to render a single frame versus what an optimized video game engine can do in a 90th of a second. So that is like a crazy gap that I think is definitely going to narrow, and we're going to be using this type of computer-generated horsepower to create more immersive stories in VR. And so, as I was saying earlier, that this is really a merging of the film and the games industry. In the middle of that is the VR, and I think the second wave of that will be AR, or augmented reality. And basically, this is the opportunity to do something in between the passive world of just watching a movie and the interactive world of playing wherever you want in an unlimited world. And so we created VRC to help structure this type of content and create premium story-driven content and experiences using this technology, but for the right reasons, hopefully. We debuted ourselves in the Wall Street Journal because we didn't want to have a flimsy announcement in a trade magazine where we wrote the press release ourselves and told everyone how cool we were. And we wanted it to be a legit, unveiling of our company. And so we did that, and we're announcing that we had alliances with a lot of these great filmmakers, and that they're brewing up all this stuff that I can't talk about, but it's coming soon. And we're all united in this feeling that if you look at the scope and scale of the various existing media, entertainment media businesses, television, movies, video games, that this is going to be at least as big as some of those smaller ones, and probably somewhere in the middle, as television is shrinking in its popularity these days. I think that this is going to start, approaching that level eventually, or we'll be merging those two worlds. A lot of what we're trying to create is these episodic adventures, much like the binge watching of Game of Thrones. Why not create little appealing episodes of virtual reality that then have a cliffhanger that leads you to the next episode? So this is, make no mistake, a really huge paradigm shift in entertainment. And that's why I'm excited to be here today to tell you about all this, whether you believe the VR, AR secret Kool-Aid or not, We'll see together. There's something to it. It may not be the biggest thing ever. We'll see. But regardless of that, the platforms are changing, the distribution is changing, and the way in which we create media is changing, I think, faster than most people can keep up. And if you're currently working or going to continue to be working in Hollywood, in entertainment, in media, in any way, you should be very aware of these trends. And so my general advice to you guys is, in order to survive all these ups and downs, please, don't lose sight of what originally made you passionate about your business, right? I'm doing this today because I really like talking about previs and making movies, and that's why we do it, because we like making great things that make people happy and delight children everywhere. And also, don't lose sight of what you're really good at. Specialize in what you're exceptional. Don't try to be everything to everybody. Be keenly aware of the industry trends all around you. You don't always have to pivot right away, but be ready and poised to quickly adapt as new business models are presented. And do that without losing sight of what your employees need and what they really want. A lot of what I've been looking at recently is making sure that the messaging to my company is the right messaging, so people didn't think we were just dropping everything for virtual reality. It's very much an evolution. And do this whilst building strong alliances. I mean, I'm only here because I relied on a lot of other people to build me up personally, and then now in the company context, companies working with other companies can do something that's greater than the sum of their parts. And I think we need to do more sharing than more competition these days to make that come true. So hats off to all you guys, because you guys are the next generation of business leaders, managers that are going to lead this revolution. And so cheers to you, all of you guys. And any questions?
Let's thank Chris for this great presentation.